say, and we rewild it. We put in wildebeest, zebra, inyala, impala, kudu, and a whole lot of other species. And I started game breeding, so live sales. And yeah, and then we started a rehabilitation farm where we got animals in it that people had caught in traps or had been left by their mothers and that, and we rehabilitated them and we let them go. So my hobbies include fishing, first of all, hunting, reading, and traveling, and then just my skill set. Sorry. Okay, so we're going to start. In this first slide, you'll see some pictures of hunting back in the 1980s or the 1880s. Sorry. In the 1880s in South Africa. So hunting is one of the most oldest traceable human activities on Earth. Whether for sporting, commerce, or cultural reasons, hunting has been a part of mankind's heritage for the millennia. When the Dutch arrived in the early 16th century, hunting in South Africa was primarily for food. But in the 19th century, this all changed when the European colonists arrived, and trophy hunting and sport hunting became one of the big activities. For take example, in 1866, a single farm in Kroonstad exported 157,000 black wildebeest and blesbok skins. And it's said by the 1900, both species were near threatened. But interestingly enough, what happened in our history of wildlife is wrong slide. What happened was, it wasn't actually hunting that had decimated populations in South Africa. It was actually agriculture. What happened was they decided that wildlife and agriculture such as cattle, sheep and goats couldn't be farmed in one area. Firstly, competition of food. Secondly, diseases. So here on the slide, you'll see the different diseases that wildlife carry that can be carried through to livestock. So you've got rinderpest outbreak, foot and mouth, blue tongue, African horse sickness, and Rift Valley fever. So it was decided that wild game were to be exterminated to make way for cattle farms. In 1930, the farms in South Africa were sold at a much higher cost if it said sonder wilde diere, which means in English, without wild animals. So it was quite a tragedy what had happened. But between 1959 and 1961, Raymond Dasman and Archie Morsman, two scholars from the United States, were invited to come to Rhodesia to see Ray Smithers, who then worked for the Rhodesian National Museum, to investigate whether wildlife on land belonging to a gentleman by the name of Ian Henderson, covering about approximately 54,000 hectares, could coexist with and be ranched with in a similar manner to cattle. They did this, and it was claimed that not only could wildlife survive with cattle, but that in itself game ranching held an enormous potential for augmenting Africans' protein supply. During this time already, animal husbandry in Transvaal, South Africa, was well established, and experts were very well poised to take up the test and advance to Dasman's ideas. By the mid-60s, the emotional value of wildlife was very well established, and that became the changing of our game ranching, and it was an absolute change and revolution. So to get started, South African wildlife sector comprises of three subsectors. So we break into wildlife ranching, wildlife activities, and wildlife products. Under wildlife ranching, you get your primary activities, which is your breeding and live sales. Secondary is live captures, translocation, veterinary services, fencing and maintenance. Second sector is wildlife activities, which is your primary activities is your ecotourism. That's going to national parks and photographic tourism. Trophy hunting and biltong hunting. Secondary is accommodation, transport, equipment supply, which is your arms and ammunitions, and the taxidermy. And third is wildlife products. Primary is your game meat processing, skin and hide production, as well as other products such as curios. And then you get your secondary, which is packing and transportation. What is very interesting to note is that under your wildlife products, which I'm going to start with, Western Europe consumes more than 100,000 tons per year. South Africa exports 600 to 20,000 tons of game meat per year, valued at about 60 to 200 million rand. New Zealand exports 40,000 tons per year, valued at approximately 4 billion. Today, still, there is the world supply of game meat is short by 60,000 tons. So there's a huge demand to be fulfilled. And here's just some products that you get in South Africa. The slide underneath the venison cuts was the biltong and that we had actually taken photographs at Kruger National Park. And they sell a lot of game meat. And you can see in Yala sausage, and in pies, kudu pies, buffalo pies, chicken babuti, then game birds. Because don't forget, game meat is not only your antelope species, it's also game birds. It's incredibly healthy as well. Here's some wildlife products. Here's a gun bag, some skins, kudu horn lamps, table. So there's a lot of products. Okay. Sorry, I just want to go back there. What I want to note is with the game meat, Nedbank in South Africa, it's one of our banks, together with WWF, formed a Nedbank Green Trust, which is funding conservation outcomes in KwaZulu-Natal, which is a non-profit organization focused on biodiversity conservation to develop game meat protocol and demonstrate projects in partnership with game reserves and the retail meat industry. So the bank is focused on positively building society, and the Nedbank regards this as a huge project and one which is benefiting communities. They've been funding it for over 3 years and it's to test and develop a market for wild-sourced game meat in a manner that is consistent with biodiversity conservation. And it's an absolute fantastic success story. Okay. Right, then we go on to hunting. In 2019, 200,000 to 250,000 local biltong hunters came in South Africa, spent 12 billion rand. It's estimated that 8,000 international clients are spending plus minus 5.8 billion rand in South Africa. So the average spending in trophy hunter, including game hunting and accommodation, was around about $17,000 US. It created about 50,000 jobs in 2019 in rural areas, and its social responsibility to communities. The core of South African tourism industry is based on wildlife tourism. Private game reserves and game farms, which form part of wildlife tourism, constitute most of the wildlife products in South Africa. On the private reserves and game farms, hunting is one of the major income generators for product owners. By calculating, trophy and biltong hunters contribute to a combined 13.6 billion rand in South Africa to the economy in 2007. A survey was conducted, and hunting, and it was said, a survey was conducted in 2016 in Northern Cape, Free State, and Limpopo, in which hunting had created 31,500 jobs. So to break it down, Limpopo was 17,806, Northern Cape was 9,072, and the Free State was 5,558. So hunting does contribute to a lot. also contributes towards investment. So an average spend by product owners on infrastructure, so your hunting lodges, is just over 7 million, with some even spending up to 30 million. This all adds up to infrastructure development in rural areas. And what you must note is that most of the land used for hunting in South Africa was originally farmland, used for crops, cattle, and other farming activities. To transform the land for hunting purposes required a lot of spending and a lot of time. Okay, here is trophy hunting's top 10 species. So when clients come from overseas, this is generally the first thing on their list would be springbuck, impala, kudu, blesbuck, black wildebeest, blue wildebeest, warthog, zebra, oryx, and red hartebeest. And there you'll see the average prices to hunt. So the springbuck average price was 3,976 Rand. We can go down to zebra, which was 10,502. Okay. Biltong hunting. Now, as I said, biltong hunting brought in the most into our economy, and that's through local hunters. So they too enjoy springbuck, impala, blesbuck, warthog, kudu, oryx, blue wildebeest, eland, bush pig, and black wildebeest. So there you'll see the total species hunted. The first one is springbuck, 1,819. Impala, 907 were hunted. Warthog, 516. Kudu 479, oryx 402, and so on. Sorry. Here's some pictures of some hunts. So here's an impala, and then a lovely warthog, an oryx, and a waterbuck. Okay, so when we look at South Africa is broken up into different provinces. Each province has a different vegetation and different rainfalls. So we look at Eastern Cape, which is your coastal, Western Cape coastal, KwaZulu-Natal. Then you start to go inland, which is Free State, Northern Cape, Northwest, Gauteng, and Mpumalanga, and Limpopo. And funny enough, most game farms are found in Limpopo. Okay, so, sorry. What happens is South Africa wildlife is run by Department of Environmental Affairs, which has now changed to the Department of Environmental Forestry and Fishery, DEF. What happens is each province has different set of rules according to the Department of Environmental Affairs. So you can only have certain species that were there before. In Eastern Cape, for example, you're not allowed, in some areas, you're not allowed to keep black wildebeest because they were not endemic to the area. Same for KwaZulu-Natal. And the same for Mpumalanga, Gauteng, and Limpopo, Northwest, and Free State. So we're very strictly monitored. Oh, sorry. Okay. So commercial and private wildlife ranches cover 16.8% of the country's land mass, covering approximately 20.5 million hectares. Approximately 9,000 commercial and private wildlife ranches. Limpopo province, as I said, 50%. Northern Cape has 20%. In the Eastern Cape, 12%, and other provinces remaining 18%. There you have, next to each province, you'll see the number of wildlife production units for each province, percentage of total wildlife production units, the area which is in hectares, percentage of total area, and average size of wildlife production units per hectare. So the wildlife ranching industry has grown exponentially over the last 20 years, from 3,500 farms to over 10,000 plus game farms today, worth around $1.5 billion per year. There's more wildlife privately owned, about 18 million, than any time over the past 10 years. Our national parks only have about 6 million. So the ranching industry holds 3 times more land than national and provincial parks. Okay. Just want to get this as a video.
Breeding game is no longer just about how many animals you have on your farm. It's now about how rare the species are. Animals with unique bloodlines are highly sought after in the trade.
You've got your certain fixtures like the buffalo and the sable and the nyala and the roan and the rhinoceros. That will always be there. But from time to time, you get new bloodlines, new color variations, yellow blazeback, golden wildebeest, black impala, saddle black impala. And those tend to, once they start facing in the market, they're featuring in the market, they tend to fetch the highest prices.
In a recent exotic game auction in Limpopo, South Africa's largest game farming area, dozens of rare game went on sale. Farmers, breeders, and even investors came from far and wide to showcase their animals and to get a glimpse of what was on offer.
Previously, they were only a little bunch of animals, and now people want to have those animals to breed with them and to better them so that they have those genetics. And it will carry on as long as there are interest in the game industry, because it's something new.
Pedigree animals can fetch anything up to $2 million in a single lot auction. Nyala and kudu are among the cheapest animals, selling from around $2,500. Female animals usually attract higher prices than males. This is one of several elite game auctions that are held annually. Today, 444 animals of the highest quality will go up for sale. This auction is expected to raise up to $5 million. But the auction beat expectations and raised $6.8 million. The highest price tag belonged to a buffalo bull, which sold for $660,000.
He's my baby. I bought him as a part of a group of 6 young bulls when they were 16, 18 months old. And we've been monitoring him ever since. And knowing right from the start, my vet, who's actually called Neil Crew, told me that, listen, he thinks that this bull will turn out to be a great bull.
Organizers of the auction, Place Central, says this was the biggest auction they've seen. While the auctions have grown over the years, farmers admit it's not easy. Wild animals get stressed easily, and it's difficult to transport them. Farmers say it's important to have the correct skills in breeding, capturing, buying, and selling of animals.
It's a long planning. I think the biggest challenge is to get all the exact animals on the day of the auction, and then to travel with all the game. There's a lot of work to be done. You work with these animals 3-4 times before you're able to actually move them.
Rhino also went on auction, but there was not one bidder. Farmers are no longer keen on rhino purely because of the security risks involved. Rhino poaching is on the increase, and despite several interventions by government and the private sector, rhino killings are being reported daily. More than 1,500 rhinos have been killed in the last 2 years, which is threatening to wipe out the species. Sumitra Nadu, CCTV, Bella Bella, Limpopo.
Okay. Right, what's interesting to note that South Africa is one of the only few countries in the world where conditioned ownership of wildlife is invested with private landowners, which presents game ranchers with a comparative advantage. There is no reason why game ranching cannot become or remain one of the leading agricultural land use options in years to come. Okay, here we have an auction statistics on buffalo, sable, and roan. So in 2016, a buffalo sold for 185 million rand, the highest that any buffaloes ever sold for. So here in buffalo in 2017, 40% of buffalo sales. In 2018, it went up to 45% of buffalo sales at auctions. In 2019, it went to 52%. Buffaloes were sold on auction. Sable, in 2017, 24% of sables went on auction and were sold. 2018, 23% were sold, and in 2019, 13% were sold. The most expensive sable ever sold was in 2015 and it went for 27 million rand. Roan antelope, also part of your exotic species, 2017, 5% were only sold on auction. It went down in 2018 to 3%, and in 2019 it went up to 7%. So here we have right through for the last, from 2000 to 2018, this is our annual game live sales. So we have the value, how many animals were sold, and the average. I will make this presentation available to Rajiv afterwards, so if anybody wants to look through the numbers, because it's quite a lot to go through, you can have a look at it. I just want to touch, in 2014, you'll see the auctions were at its peak. So in 2014, right through to 2016. Okay, so the total revenue for the year, it will show from 2000 to 2018. You can see it peaked, as I said, from 2014, 15, and 16, and that's when color variants came in. Quantity of animals sold, the same thing, 2014, 15, and 16, it peaked. And then the average pricing, it peaked in 2012, this went down, and then it slowly came up again 2014, 15, and 16. So some interesting facts. From 2009 to 2014, prices for iconic game shot through the roof. The selling price of sable rose by 479%, and of disease-free buffalo by 540%, according to figures from Wildlife Ranching South Africa. 2015, a Zambian sable bull sold for 27 million at a game auction in Limpopo. Another sold for 21 million on the same day. At a game auction in April 2018, Eastern Cape, a pregnant buffalo cow fetched for 4.5 million, the highest bid of the day. Her price, though, was dwarfed by her sire, which had been sold for 178 million in 2016. Our president now, Cyril Ramaphosa, before he stepped up as South African president, invested millions in game farms in Limpopo. He was fond of sables, buffaloes, earning him the nickname Buffalo Man. In 2012, he sold 3 of his white impala for 28 million rand. He also owns black impala, buffalo, and golden wildebeest. He is one of 7 members of the stud game breeders group, which City Press reported to rank between 130 million and 140 million from wildlife auctions annually at the height of the boom. Okay. Now we go on to game capturing. And this is a video from a very good friend of mine, Willie, who's been doing game capturing, I think, since he could walk. And this is a game capture of a buffalo. Okay, so list of threatened species from 1950 and recovery. So as I said before, because of agriculture, wildlife was sort of exterminated. But because of private ownership, we've brought those numbers back. So we look at the first species, which is blesbuck. In 1950, there was approximately 2,000 blesbuck left. Today, we're sitting at 300,000, and 95% of those is owned on private land. Bontebok, there were only 19 left. Today, we have 8,000, and 87% are on private land. Sable, 450. Today, 15,000, 97% on private land. Roan, 150. Today, plus minus 4,500, and 95% of those is on private land. Cape Mountain zebra, 80 of them in 1950. Today, 4,791. And they say between 81 and 98% privately owned. Black wildebeest, 500. Total today, 17,000. Privately owned, 80%. Okay, so we're looking at the Bontebok. It was brought back from the brink of extinction in 1921. Today, there are over 8,000. 85% of Bontebok reside on privately owned farm. Significant economic value in the game breeding industry. They're sold between 120,000 and 150,000 each. This is a significant success story made possible through the joint initiatives of the government and private game breeding sector. The cooperation between government and ranching sector in the case of the Bontebok preservation has been highly effective. If we look at the Bontebok and we compare it to the high roller in Kenya, which is extremely endangered, the Bontebok we can see grew. So it had limited numbers in 1990. I think there were about 121 left. In 2000, as I said, in 2020, we have over 8,000. The high roller started off at having 15,000 in Kenya. Today, they say there are 400. This is due to disease mostly, but if you gave the high roller, if you privatized the farming of it and you gave it a value, I can guarantee you that numbers would soar and you would see an absolute comeback of the species. Okay, so I'm going to look at just out of interest sake, because giraffe were looked at CITES this year. There's an estimated 21,053 and 26,919 individuals, they say, in South Africa at the moment. In the 1980s, there were approximately 250 private-owned giraffes. Today, approximately 12,059 are privately owned, that's excluding national parks. From 2010 to present, approximately 2,300 have only been hunted, and it also includes domestic hunters. And if you think about it, that is not a lot. So the number of giraffes trophy hunted by international clients. In 2010, only 122. 2011, 232. 2012, 278. 2013, 260. 2014, 400. 2015, it dropped back to 285. 2016, 323. 2017, 301. And what's very interesting to note is that because now giraffe are protected, most game farmers in that now will probably have to try and get rid of their giraffe because there is no economic value to them to keep them whatsoever, which is quite sad. Okay, then we go on to color variants. As we know, your color variant and the species is extremely expensive, especially in auctions. So what happened was no other term was dominated with the wildlife industry as much as color variants. Golden wildebeest, black impala prices skyrocketed in the game market in 2000. 14 years later, it crashed. Critics warned about this, and they said it was nothing more than a pyramid scheme in which the first to invest ranking in high returns, whereas the latecomers paid astronomical sums that simply was not sustainable in the long run. So color variance, what it came down to was basically supply and demand. There was a saturation of the market, and it demonstrates that the capacity that private enterprise has to produce if there is an incentive. So in 1990, the growth, in 1990, the growth in the wildlife industry was driven by an economical and ecological benefits derived from plains game species. Financial pressures pushed towards breeding of a higher valued species. Okay, so there you had black springbuck, went for 327,000. White saddled springbuck went for 4.2 million. And black impala went for 2 million. Okay. Golden wildebeest, there you have a golden wildebeest next to a normal blue wildebeest. Saddleback and blessbuck with normal blessbuck and a black impala. Okay, so black springbuck was the first color variant to ever be sold on a formal game auction. In 1991, the average price for it was $327,000 each. White saddleback blessbuck went for $4.2 million. Black impala sold for $2.5 million. Oversupply of certain color variants in recent years has seen some black impala prices plummet from 750,000 2 years ago to 56,000 Rand today. On live game sales, you can also pick them up for about 15,000 Rand. So that just shows how the price has dropped. So scientists have said that color variants, it can lead to loss of species variety. There's no control over genetic mutations, and selective breeding, the pressure from selective breeding can lead to inbreeding and abnormalities. And the large-scale breeding of such animals could be threatened the long-term conservation of a species, and it also weakens the population's genetic base and its genes. It does pose some environmental risks, as most animals are being raised in smaller camps, which then they are at risk of disease. So the key to a successful game ranching and hunting is private ownership of land. The bottom line is wildlife needs a value. Without a value, most wildlife could be lost, particularly in South Africa. Communities need to directly benefit from wildlife, or their tolerance will run thin. And this is a lesson that we've learned and we've seen in many African countries. To close off, here's a cute little video of the wildlife that come and visit us daily.
Here's all my hungry kids. They're all here. No, I think our kids are still hungry. Okay, I've got something for you.
Cute. Okay, and here, if anybody is interested, as I say, I'll pass it on to Rajev. These are the references. You've got your Sandparks General Audit, 2018 to 2019, and the impact of hunting in Biltong from the SA economy. So everything is here. There's also what I've added in is net banks and WWF's project that they're doing, which is very interesting to take note, especially after WWF has said they're not supporting hunting in the UK. Wildlife ranching South Africa, I've added that in, as well as a new international market for game meat. As I said, there is still a shortage of game meat. They say approximately 60,000 tons, but I think it could be more. And yeah, that's round about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pamela. I think that was a good insight on how the wildlife ranching is done in South Africa. Thanks a lot. So we're open for questions and they can be put on chat. Mr. Rajiv, would you like to take over the questions from the chat, please? Or do you want me to proceed with that? You're on mute.
Okay, I'm unmuted. I'm off. Yeah. So, Pam, what are the outcomes as far as ecosystem goods and services go? We've talked about the wildlife and all that, but what about all these, the huge banks of land that are saved because of wildlife ranching? gives a lot of scope for the ecosystem goods and services like water cycle, like soil cycles, all that. So what is your take? How does that affect the environment in the larger, the broader picture?
Okay. Would you like to answer that?
Yeah,
'Cause you...
sorry, just as an example, Rajiv, is that I'm sitting here right now in
right. Yep. Yes.
How are you? Sorry, I'm
great.
But just as an example, we live in a golf estate here. I look out the window and there's some Inyala over there and there's some zebra over there.
Right.
So it's 150 hectares, which is extremely small. But what we, what the people catch here on their camera traps outside their houses are a phenomenal amount of small animals. So what happens is the entire ecosystem comes to play. I'm looking out the window here and the birds are going crazy at the bird feeder. The little dung beetles that come in. The other day we saw oxpeckers, which have been annihilated. Well, they suffered a lot since people started dipping their cattle. Oxpeckers died off. So oxpeckers are starting to recover. And then the things that they saw on the cameras were things like, well, in fact, we had a leopard kill on the golf course the other day. To think that can happen in 150 hectares is very difficult to comprehend. So everyone has this negativity around the fact that this is fenced in. But it doesn't matter to leopard, it doesn't matter to water mongoose, it doesn't matter to a white-tailed mongoose, it doesn't matter to porcupines, it doesn't matter to a whole lot of other animals that just move very freely along the areas. So there are all these little benefits. And remember, next to us is another farm, and next to them is another farm, and next to them is another farm. So that's how everyone it all sort of works together. And we're only 3 kilometers from town.
Right. Incredible.
And what Pam didn't say is that we actually live in Limpopo province, which is the province that has the highest number of game farms in the country. And just up the road is the place where the 174 million rand buffalo was sold. So, whatever.
Interesting, actually, quite interesting. So we have a few questions on the chat. I think some of them have been answered by Michael. So I would again just ask for your opinion as well on these, please. Avinandan asks, when you say roan antelope is exotic, do you mean not native to South Africa?
Yeah, no, it's not. Well, only in certain areas is it native to South Africa, but yeah, they classify it as exotics.
That was the wording I think that I think is incorrect. It's not exotic. It's and I asked Pam to change the word to iconic, but they do use it as something that's unusual, and it used to be unusual. Now they're very common.
Okay.
So they're not really exotic. They're indigenous to certain parts of South Africa and probably exotic to other parts, but it still means that it's not exotic. Yeah.
So another question from Humayun Tahir. Are the color variants due to natural genes or are they artificially bred as exotics?
No.
Pam went into the color variants because she wanted to demonstrate a little bit of the negatives that happens, that can happen as a cautionary tale. The fact that the market evolved out of that, or the market actually eventually evolved out of it, is a good thing. And I do think that as fast as we breed or bred, or the game ranchers bred the color variants in, they can breed them out again as well.
Yeah.
So they still have the core populations. There's a lot of swapping of wildlife going on all the time, moving from one place to another. As a small example, we just moved 6 impala out 2 weeks ago. We're moving more impala in. It's just to get to change the the sires inside the population, and specifically in a small environment like what we have here.
Yeah, you see, like on my game farm in East London where we breed and sell, I make sure that the genetics are top notch, because what happens is, like, take blessbuck for instance. They get, if you keep breeding with the same male over and over and over and over and over, you are going to get a mottled color or a white blessbuck. It may happen. So what we used to do is we used to breed for 2 years, take that male out, either swap with a game farm near us, because it's quite expensive getting a vet there and that's a dart, or we would cull it and then we would bring in a new male, so there's new blood, and that's how most places are doing it. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, yes. And also I thank Michael for answering these questions to our listeners over here. So one question by Dr. Adam is, I'd like to ask about the price of buffalo. Or do you want us to ask the question? Mr. Adam, would you like to go forward, please?
Yeah, hi there. Yeah, I've heard quite a few people in the industry say that the prices that people, these advertised prices that buffalo go for at auctions are just nonsense, and that money never changes hands, and that they're just pumping up the bubble. And I've had a few people say that to me, and I've seen people post something similar. I just wondered, do you think there's anything in that? Do you think that the sort of the buffalo bubble is being inflated by this sort of stuff, or do you think that these are, that it is straight up that someone really is paying 185 million rand for a buffalo?
No, they are paying that amount of money for the buffaloes.
Well, they'd have to pay taxes on it, and it'd have to go down on the auction and stuff. And but it's just like horse trading, I think. When the race horses are sold, I think there's a very simple, it could be a similar sort of thing. I'm not sure if I understand that, but it does indicate that there is an interest in the economy, and it is a good gauge on how successful, through our own success, the prices have dropped, which is indicated that it's reached a saturation. So, that would be probably the way of saying it.
Yeah, you see, when it comes to live game sales, the market has gone down considerably due to numerous factors. One would be drought, and second would be saturation of market. So you have a scenario, let's take Limpopo, where people have bought all their wild game at auctions in it, and they've started breeding them up on their own. So they don't really need to go out there and to buy more game. So as we've seen, if you look on the graphs, it's slowly declined, your game sales, but that's just due to saturation. But there are buffaloes that are going for 100 and something million, and that is happening.
And Adam, you asked that question. What I did is, apparently 5 people bought that buffalo, and they spread it over 5 farms. With 30 or 40,000 per farm. Yeah. So it would spend 6 months in each farm for a certain siring up to 300-400 other buffalo. And
that makes the economics of that make a lot more sense than a single owner.
Yeah.
I bet the insurance policy is a tricky one to navigate.
Yeah. True. One of those farms produced, of their 30 cows that he sired, if one of them produced and one did produce a very valuable buffalo, then he would have got his money back from that. And then they produce a whole bunch of other buffalo, which are less valuable, but that's the theory behind it,
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I sort of did this a while ago, that exercise I did with Sable as well. At one stage, I was thinking of buying into a Sable as an investment, purely as an investment. Thankfully, I didn't, but I sort of did the sums down to figure out how it could work out. And it looked very lucrative at the time. Unfortunately, I didn't do anything about it because Sable prices have plummeted. They're about 1/10 of what they were when I was considering getting into this.
Yeah, they were in there, I'd say, what, about 56,000? Am I right? Around about 56, 46,000 to buy.
No, they were 300,000.
Now you're looking at 8,000 Rand. Yeah. That's how it's dropped.
Yeah. And our next question is actually Dr. Neerja Singh. So you may please ask, Dr. Neerja.
Yes. Yeah, that's, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm Prashant. That's my wife's mobile phone, so that's why her name.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I just want to know how large are these farms, these private game reserves, on an average? How big is the area in hectares or whatever?
I can give it to you in hectares. Okay, I would say the roundabout the average is there's about 3,000 to 5,000 hectares. So your game farms starting at about, hunting is only, if you're looking at hunting's only allowed in certain provinces over 1,000 hectares. If your farm's under 1,000 hectares, there's no hunting going on. So most of these game farms are from 1,000 hectares right up until 15,000 hectares, privately owned.
And what sometimes happens is that they join together. So, so you would have a few landowners would join their farms together and make a conservancy. So they get into quantities of scale and they can actually function better. But that does happen in a number of cases.
You see, what's very interesting is there's actually a migration route that runs through South Africa, a natural migration route, which doesn't happen anymore because of infrastructure and that type of thing. But what the talk was that game farms that were along that natural migration route would eventually join up and open up altogether. So then you have the natural flow of animals coming in, animals going out, but that hasn't happened yet. But that's basically what they're doing at Kruger National Park as well.
Right. Just one more question. When I was in South Africa way back in 2006, there was a concept of green hunting. How popular is that? Where you basically, you don't shoot the animal and kill it, you tranquilize it, dart it, take some photographs, make mold out of it. Green hunting.
Green hunting was basically for rhino only.
For endangered species. Yeah.
It's very popular, especially with overseas clients will come here because it's a very expensive exercise. You have to have a vet on duty and there has to be a reason behind why you're green darting the rhino. And then, you have, it's a lot of paperwork as well, but it's very common. I've actually booked a client now for next year, hopefully, for a green hunt on a rhino. So what happens basically is they dart it and they take samples and they either put a tracking chip in it or they dehorn it. But it is very popular.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
That's
so thank you so much. So we have a few more questions here. One from Mr. JVD Murthy. JVD asks, are these ranch bred animals also released back into the wild? If yes, how many and which species?
No, there hasn't actually been a need yet for that, as they're on their own private reserves. So as you see, most of the private sector is about what I said, about 16% owned, but not really. No, there is no need for them to be released because the only place they can be released is national parks.
So just briefly, most national parks already have surplus.
That's right.
So the national parks have been selling their surplus to private landowners. If we produce and when we get surpluses, I don't think the logic is behind. Looking at, for example, Sable, and it's very, very possible that Sable could be reintroduced from private owners back into the national parks. And I think that is something that could happen, and it's a possible philanthropic venture. But there's a massive amount of stock here and on private land that is available for that and can very easily be, as you call it, rewilded. It's not that difficult to rewild these animals.
Okay. So also there's another part of this question. How is the issue of inbreeding being addressed?
Of inbreeding? Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what I touched on briefly. When you're looking at a farm that's about 5,000, 6,000, even 2,000 hectares, there's not much inbreeding happening at all. It's only when you've got your small camps that are susceptible to inbreeding. That's why, as I said, with my farm too, I had to watch out for that, and that's why we swapped males and that all the time, so it didn't happen. But if you're looking at other wildlife ranches, as I say, that are about 1,000 to 2 and upwards hectares, you're not going to get much inbreeding.
the game capture business and is so efficient nowadays that to buy and sell animals is so easy that you can do away with the problem of inbreeding very, very easy without any effort. So I don't think people, it doesn't work in their favor to have inbred animals.
No.
So that all farmers that I know of are actively bringing in new stock and rotating whatever they have. It's very, very actively practiced.
And also, if you look at it when it comes to the hunting industry as well, your animals that are hunted are normally your old breeding stock. So that takes care of that issue. And then your new one, your new bloodline comes into play.
Yeah, that is true. So, JVD uncle, I hope this is answered for you. And just moving on to the next question is again by Avin Nandan. Avin asks, what do you have to say about the argument that trophy hunters hunt the healthiest and the most robust animals vis-a-vis natural predators like lions, hyenas that hunt old, weak, injured, or otherwise unfit animals?
This is Bugs' field.
Yeah, you know, I think there's so much made of this. What people need to understand is that the word trophy hunting or safari hunting, it takes a very, very small amount of animals out, very few animals.
It's limited.
In South Africa, for example, we've demonstrated, and I don't understand what you have to also say, what is a good gene? You know, are we going to determine the good gene, or does nature determine the good gene? So we're saying that, you know, the good genes are the ones with long horns or big tusks or big teeth. But generally speaking, I can't see an argument to say that trophy hunting has a negative impact on genes at all, and anywhere. Because most of the time, the animals are, if they are, I'm talking trophy hunting specifically, which is a very poisonous word. They are normally taken after they've produced whatever they pass their gene on.
It's past their breeding prime.
Another thing people need to understand is that trophy hunting only takes out the males, and the same gene is kept in the females. So 50% of their gene pool is kept in the female animals anyway. So the importance of that argument about gene, I think it's a bit overplayed, and I think there's an agenda to that.
Yeah.
It's an effort to try and discredit the hunting industry as per se, more than actual science.
What I would also like to add, because I see that lions were brought up, and it's a very emotional subject. When it comes to hunting lions, especially in Africa, it's heck of a monitored, all right? You only get limited tags, and a tag is your license in order to shoot the lion. What happens if you look at Zimbabwe, Zambia, Mozambique, you get limited tags. So basically what's happened is those are not privately owned concessions, they're government-owned concessions. So the government will go there and they do it's up to the concession owners to do a plus-minus game count. They get right, there's so many lions in that area, right? So you can only get 2 tags or 1 tag a year. So you basically, there's hardly any lions being shot. So it's not as if 100 lions are dying a year, which they're not. Secondly, lions in certain countries have to be over a certain age, and they have to be past their breeding prime, and they must not be part of a pride. And how the government looks at this, or national parks looks at this, is they have camera traps set up. So the concession owner will put up camera traps and they bait the lion. The lion comes, they take photos, they look at it. Normally you can tell if the lion is completely black in the nose, it's over 6 years of age. They have to look, is there a female with it? Is there another lion with it? Is it alone? They take that back. The government looks at it and they said, right, here you go. You can hunt your lion. Baiting stops. Hunt, and then it's walk and stalk. So this whole concept of lions are being hunted to near extinction, and it's not. The whole concept of animals are being hunted to near extinction, what people don't actually understand is, even in South Africa, you can't just go out and hunt. You have licenses, you have tags. it's animals that are allowed to be hunted is limited. You can't hunt, some countries you cannot hunt females. You can only hunt males. So it varies.
So the other thing about, and I know it's a very sensitive issue coming in about lions and that, because obviously many other people can't understand it, and you know, it's taken a bit for me to understand. But lions are voracious breeders. They'll have 4 cubs at a time. They can do that every 2 years at least. If the cubs are killed, the mother will have another 4 cubs almost immediately after. So the issue about lions is all lions need is what every other animal needs, is they need a habitat where they can eat something. If there's enough food for them to eat, they'll produce like crazy. I can prove this to you in places like, for example, the reserve I've got shares in Botswana. The lion population has grown from, what was it, 7 to 19. And you look at Ruby Valley Conservancy is another very good example. They technically should only have 300 lions. They've got 500. They need to, and I'm sure, I don't know to speak about this, but I mean, they're producing far more lions than they can possibly hold. And the consequence of having those lions on other animals, particularly the smaller animals, the bat-eared fox, the aardvark, the pangolin, and also some other animals are particularly sensitive to predation, like eland, and so and also giraffe are very sensitive to predation by lions. So if you have too many lions, you don't get any baby giraffes; they will get eaten up.
Well, your whole ecosystem turns upside down.
That's a topic for the discussion that I'll be giving you guys sometime. But that's, yeah, it is a sensitive issue, and I understand why. But
I was the one who asked the question. I was not talking about lions. I was actually talking about these antelopes. But I think you clarified it by saying our understanding of what is a good gene, like in terms of long horns, is different from nature's.
Correct.
Yeah. So I think you clarified it. I didn't mention lions actually. I was talking specifically. It's about antelopes and others, where the perception is trophy hunters go after those strong, robust males, which are needed for the population. But as you clarified, you know, our understanding of genetic strength is different from nature's understanding of it.
We are dealing with it.
Physical strength and all those other overriding characteristics. So those are, yeah, it is a big debate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But quite interesting, actually. Different insight we've got into this world. So actually, we have quite a few questions from even our online users on Facebook. So I'll just shift for a little bit onto the questions there. Okay. Is there a problem of poaching outside the national park or these ranches?
Yes, there is.
This is by Mr. Preet Chima.
Yeah, poaching is everywhere. It's wide ranging. It's on private reserves. It's on national reserves. And what we have to stress is anti-poaching costs a lot of money. It's not pocket change. And the thing is, if you take your rhino breeders, especially like John Hume, I mean, for him to maintain his rhino population and keep them safe is R1 million a month. 2 million a month.
It's obscene.
And the thing is, what we've got to also look at is when it comes to especially a rhino farm breeder, because that's where you're going to have anti-poaching units in it, and it's where a lot of poaching happens. In order for them to be able to put up that amount of cash every month, there has to be something coming back. So there has to be an economical value. And at the moment, which is the sad point, there is no value. I can tell you rhino prices have dropped even in live sales as well as in hunting prices, which you can hunt white rhino, but nobody buys them. Nobody's interested. So the thing is, you have to be able to have some sort of incentive to, you know, to bring some money, some sort of money in, so that at least you can put it towards anti-poaching. On most private reserves, there is anti-poaching units, and I can tell you now, it costs a lot of money. On Bugs' reserve,
yeah, it costs a lot of money.
It's a lot of money to have anti-poaching.
I'd just like to add something of interest, because a couple of years ago, I did a little bit of an exercise where they did the poaching statistics. And I managed to calculate that by far the majority of poaching is going on in our national parks. So, and I worked out, I think I can't remember the statistic, but the national parks were losing, depending on what figure you thought they were losing about 7 to 8% of their rhinos per year, which is basically exactly what the rhinos can produce. And on the private rhinos, owners were losing 2%. In other words, their population was still growing through the poaching pandemic. So it is from an anti-poaching perspective, it's easier to prevent poaching on a smaller land than it is on a very large park like the sand parks.
Yeah. I mean, on our farm alone, we had security. I mean, it was only 250 hectares. We had security cameras up out of every corner that we could possibly put, because we've had people come in and they put the dogs in. And of course, they go after impala, inyala. So it's basically meat poaching. And we spent around about 15 grand a month as well on private security, just to drive around our premises, just to check that there's no poaching. So it costs a lot of money.
Okay. So again, I'm getting back to our questions here. Thank you. I mean, Colonel Chima, I hope that was answered for you. Then we have one question. Do you think this will work in other countries? I mean, saving endangered species. So is this a way, I mean, just an extension from my side to this question. I mean, this method of ranching and, you know, would it help saving other endangered species around the world? Or is this the right approach?
There's no reason why it can't be adapted. I mean, South Africa is a success story of doing it. So I can't see a problem of it not working. The main thing is, if you give an animal a value, people are going to protect that animal. They're going to farm that animal. That animal the population will grow. So you give a value to it, it's going to work.
Okay. So the next question is from Dr. Sanjeev Kumar. His question is there any legal policy to restore the originality of genes in regards to color variations?
I think what's going to happen now is, because their value has dropped, I think the market will eventually will determine that the people go back to breeding normal animals again. I hope that will happen. But you know, I don't see it. I mean, I've had my problems with that. It is something that I would rather didn't happen. But I don't see it as the end of the world.
No.
I think we can get around that. And the good news is that the market is an amazing thing. Is that it's actually decided for itself that this is not going to work, and that a normal, good, solid, original gene is better.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I hope Dr. Sanjeev Kumar, your question is answered. And next question is by Mr. Gubala Ramakrishna Rao. He is a forest officer here. So this question is how the revenue of sale amount shared between government and farm owners. Can you throw light on the government control on ranching?
Yeah, I'd like to answer that one, because quite frankly, I'm a firm believer that yes, you do need regulations, but you must not over-regulate. Over-regulation will absolutely suffocate the business, and it pushes people into dishonesty. So the freer, the better the market. As I said earlier, the market is an amazing thing. It actually eventually tells you where to go. And as what's happened in South Africa, the market actually eventually told or addressed the issue that went back into biodiversity and conservation issues. So it's good to see that actually has happened. There were a lot of people making a lot of money at one stage, and now there are a lot of people with a lot of farms who now are going to have to find a different business model based on the same regulations. But yes, I think if India were to learn from us, they should, well, I think we'll quickly see things like color variants and stuff like that need to be controlled in the early stages, and that would help.
Okay. Yes. So next question is again, by Mayan Tahir. Out of all the revenue generated through hunting or ranching activities, how much of it is plowed back into conservation activities?
So that's a difficult question because basically when you own the land and the animals, your only responsibility is to your own land and your animals. So you put back into your land so that it can provide better for the animals. So most of the people I know of who have game farms will remove alien species of, trees and things like that. So that is good. But from that point of view, the responsibility of the actual landowner doesn't go beyond his land. Now, when you're talking about the same question could be asked in countries whereby land ownership and animal ownership is a bit more less transparent, So animals are transient. People don't really have land rights. What needs to happen is you need to give create some pseudo economy around that whereby they feel ownership, a tangible benefit from that wildlife. And those benefits do go back
into communities.
And you must also remember as well that the landowners in South Africa are a community.
Mm.
So
and there's a lot of community-based projects that get done as well. A lot gets put into schooling.
And Pam was talking about the trickle-down economy. Mm. So the people who built lodges for 7 million, they had to employ builders, buy stones, employ labor, get people around. So there are a lot of other benefits going through outside of just that, into the taxidermy industry, the taxi industry, the transport industry, all sorts of things. Yeah.
Yeah. So it spills over.
Oh, okay. All right. Just for some follow-up questions here from JVD Nutri. Do all ranches follow similar practices? How many of these animals find their way into Chinese market?
Okay. No, they don't all operate the same way. And when it comes into, is he talking about, depends if he's saying Chinese market illegally or legally. That's the difference.
Both, if I may interrupt, come in, both.
Yes.
Both. Okay, all right, there we go.
Because we heard we read some horror stories here.
Okay, what happens, if you're talking about the Chinese market legally, up until 2 years ago, the line bone trade was legal from South Africa's perspective. And I think Rajev and I and some others on the WhatsApp group as well saw the effect of them no longer allowing lion bones to be exported. Poaching went up, that we've noticed in India as well. Illegally, it does happen, but it's hard to control.
If I can just help out here, I think most of the game ranching industry in this country is totally legal. Everything, totally, everything happens above board.
Yeah.
So anyone who we buy and sell to, whether they could be Chinese, they could be anyone. It's absolutely legitimate, and it hasn't had an impact. When there's been bans on certain products, then the market has finds another way of working, which is illegal.
Which is your rhino horn, your lion bone.
So I'm of the opinion, and a very strong opinion, that what's happened with the rhino horn in South Africa is that by making it illegal, we've given all the incentives to the criminals.
Yeah.
And then it's become illegal. If we were to make it legal, quite legal, we would be able to outcompete those people who the underground trade, and we would make them insignificant. So there is a very strong argument for that. Particularly with rhino horn, is that it can be provided without killing the rhino, and many times more kilograms of rhino horn can be produced in a rhino's life than can be given once if it was killed. For example, I think a rhino horn is 7 kilograms, And if you cut its horn off every 18 months, you can produce 47 to 50 kilograms of horn in its lifetime.
But it just proves that prohibition doesn't work.
Prohibition doesn't work.
So I think, JVD uncle, I hope that is answered for you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So we have a question actually, which has come even by an anonymous listener on Facebook, and also by Dr. Hedges Pabla, which is, can you please say a few words about canned hunting? And also, I mean, canned hunt. The concept of ranching has the philosophy of use. I mean, this is by a Facebook online question. So how does canned hunting work? That was the question.
Okay. Canned hunting is not that complicated to understand. It is illegal. In South Africa, if you caught canned hunting, it's 5 million rand fine and 10 years in jail. Now, what you have to understand is canned hunting only pertains to cat species that are captively bred. So your lion, it doesn't apply to leopard. So it's lion, hyena, and all the rest of it. And what it is canned hunting in the rules and regulations set out, but by then it was called DEET, Department of Environmental Affairs, is the following. You cannot shoot a lion, and this is only pertaining to South Africa in a fenced area. You cannot shoot a lion on the back of a bakkie. You cannot shoot it with a semi-automatic. You cannot use artificial light. You cannot use dogs. The lion has to be released within a certain period so that the darting drug, the sedative, in other words, is out of its system. You cannot hunt it where it cannot escape. Like, let's say you release it next to a fence and it wakes up by the fence and the person's there. That is canned hunting. So basically, the only way you can hunt a CBL, which we called a captive bred lion, is walk and stalk. Certain provinces, as I said, South Africa is broken up into provinces. Certain provinces, there's a certain release period. Some is 15 days, some are 20 days, some are 30 days. Depending on the hunter can phone an outfitter and say, look, let's release it for 2 months. I'll carry the cost. And they release the lion. Bear in mind, once a lion is released, it starts hunting on its own within 2 to 3 days. Its natural instinct kicks in. Canned hunting doesn't happen that often. Yes, there are shady characters in the business, but when you actually look at it, how many are actually sitting in jail? These videos that are shown on Bloodlines was famous for canned lion hunting videos of South Africa. We can't even find the outfitters that were actually in that video. The latest one has just come out by another animal rights activist. We don't know who the outfitter is, but he filmed it. And he said it's canned lion hunting. And they showed him shooting a lioness or whatever. On these hunting farms, they cannot have an oversurplus of lions. So culling is going to happen. But what it comes down to is canned hunting is not hunting in an area where there is a fence. It's hunting where there is an enclosure. You cannot release a lion in an enclosure. So that is the difference. Many have said that, oh, South Africa, the whole of the hunting industry is canned. It's not. That is not what canned means.
And I just wanted to add something here. And I mean, I prefer to look at things slightly differently, and I know it's got a really bad taste in everybody's mouth. But and I've gone full circle a few times on this topic. And I've asked myself a few questions. Is it sustainable? And I'm talking about lion hunting as in South Africa, and absolutely it's sustainable. Does it impact negatively on the wild population? Absolutely not. South Africa's wild population lion is stable, if not increasing. So even despite everything you might hear and all the negative news that you hear, in fact, it hasn't had a negative impact on the environment in all lions. So, so I'm just going to leave it at that. I think if India were to learn from us, don't do it.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
I think that's definitely an interesting suggestion. Thank you so much. Yeah. Pablo sir, I think it was answered for you, and also
Yeah, very well. Thank you.
thank you, and also I hope our anonymous Facebook friend also got that question answered. So, Avan, you had a series of questions. Would you like to?
Yeah, I just wanted to.
2 minutes, Rajshekhar, after this.
Yeah, since these ranches are private, and private means it's I have a sense of entitlement that this land belongs to me. So, what prevents someone from doing something unethical or ecologically stupid? Like to like one guy, I think his name is John Watty, if I'm not mistaken. He introduced tigers into South Africa. So, what prevents someone from introducing an invasive species like I don't know, some exotic?
Okay.
Some kangaroos or something like that, which actually harms the ecosystem of South Africa. So,
Okay, in my talk, I did mention that environmental affairs under each province is extremely strict of what species you can have and what species you can't have.
Okay.
So only species that are endemic to that area are allowed to be there. John Barty tigers happened before we had more strict rules and laws regarding what you can have and what you can't have, because strategically speaking, tigers don't actually belong in South Africa. But he's not, you cannot, I don't know how to even put it, he's more of a...
Well, he's got another business model.
I think animal rights.
So I also wanted to give something on that because, for example, fallow deer is probably a very valid example, and a lot of farmers here do have fallow deer in South Africa. Now, I used to have fallow deer when I had a farm in KwaZulu-Natal, and they instructed me to cull all of those fallow deer because to have them is illegal.
Yeah.
So yes, and I think there was another story to that as well, as they were rescuing fallow deer which used to be on Robben Island.
Okay.
And they said, no, you cannot bring them onto the mainland.
Because they don't belong there.
And eventually certain people said, look, we've already got fallow deer, so they rescued them, but the condition was that they were to never leave their property. So, so yes, there are rules like that, and kangaroos won't happen here.
What I would also like to add is also we have certain species we cannot have on the same farm. So blue wildebeest, black wildebeest, can't do it in the Eastern Cape because of inbreeding. Some places in Nyala and Bushbuck, they say inbreeding happens. Bontebok, blesbuck can't be on the same farm because of they actually interbreed. Hartebeest, Tetsubi, interbreed. So our rules and regulations are pretty strict when it comes to wildlife ranching.
Okay, so sorry, I hope that answered your question. I know we're doing this as a team, but I hope you don't mind.
Yeah. I have one question, kind of unrelated, but it's related to South Africa. But this is about African grey parrots. You can choose to answer it or choose to leave it. I don't know whether you have. So there was this controversy that the South African breeders used to import African grey parrots from rest of Africa, and that caused a decline. If you're aware of it, are you aware of it? And if so, you have anything to say on that?
Funny enough, sorry, can I answer this one? I'll tell you why. It's because I own 2 African grey parrots, and I was very involved in that, and I deeply regret having bought African grey parrots at my time. And I know, so I got involved in this because I saw parallels happening with a parrot which is indigenous to South Africa. So what I wanted to say, I think that there is a legitimate market for African grey parrots, but remember that by breeding them, once they're in captivity, they're quite capable of producing enough. So the need for being in wild stock is not as much as we expect. I don't think South Africa is the worst culprit when it comes to African grey parrots. I think there's some very bad people in the rest of the world who are doing some unscrupulous things with that. I think we're pretty tidy in that respect, if I can say that.
Okay. No, why I ask this is now it's become a big craze. Like in India, in fact, India, the demand has been very high, and there's a lot of pressure on the species. So I just wanted to know. Yeah, and many children here in India, they know more about the African grey parrot, but they don't know many of our native species.
No, that's right.
I know. I think that, look, if I were to advise anyone, if anyone says to me, well, I'd like to get a parrot, I'd say don't. Okay.
Yeah.
But then again, they don't listen.
Thank you. That's what I wanted.
So Avin is more interested in the parrots because he is the India representative for World Parrot Trust. So he represents India for those, and it's his area of interest. So, yeah.
So thank you so much. Yeah, that was a kind of unrelated, but thank you so much for answering it.
Yeah. Thanks, Avin, for this question. And Rajshekhar has a question. So please go ahead, Rajshekhar.
Pamela, your presentation is absolutely fine. My question is, as you have ranch of selling animals, like, do you foresee to export cheetahs for Indian government? India has no cheetahs so far now. Whatever our native cheetahs has been extinct. Do you foresee any intervention to export cheetahs for the government breeding program of India?
Well, I don't see that. I don't see a problem why they can't export cheetahs from South Africa. There are cheetah breeders here. There's lots of cheetah breeders. What it basically means is just applying to, as I say, Department of Environmental Affairs and permits in place. And I mean, they export other animals out of the country often.
Cheetah get exported on a regular basis. I don't know where to and who buys them, but there are a lot of NGOs running cheetah projects here.
Cheetah's lines.
And they will give you, I don't know whether you'd be able to get a wild one, but
because they are
I think it's
captively
very
bred.
possible.
Okay, to answer my question.
I'll tell you another thing about cheetahs, sorry, is that they rewild very quickly. The instinct to kill is absolutely innate. I had a friend of mine who had captive cheetahs, and when they escaped, they would kill within 20 minutes of leaving the camp.
But that's like
so they just know what they're doing. So it's not really difficult to rewild them.
Though there's a bit of difference, like the species difference is there between Asiatic cheetahs and West African cheetahs. But like this is I'm asking the policymakers this an unintended question. So it's not been happening so far in India for the breeding program.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So thanks, Rajshekhar. Actually, we all love cheetahs, and I think we should bring them back to India, I guess. Yes. So just moving on with a few more questions by Dr. Hart again. I'd like to hear more on whether you think the CBL lion bone trade is causing poaching in wildlife. Okay, this was from Michael, and I've read the 2017 paper that talks about shipments from Uganda to Laos in 2016, and I wondered whether there were any strong links between lion poaching and lion bone shipments. So I think that was more for that was more for Michael, but Adam Hart.
Yes, hi there. Yeah, that was me asking that question. I'm actually with a slight agenda because I'm just reviewing Michael Ashcroft's book Unfair Game, which is a kind of critique of the captive bred lion industry, and it includes lots of sort of breathy spy-like details about undercover investigations and things, all of which slightly run out of steam. So I was just interested in, I know Michael's an expert in that, so I was just interested in what his take was on the idea that the captive bred lion industry and the legal lion bone trade was stimulating poaching, and Michael's provided that answer very kindly on the chat. So thank you for that.
Yes.
The best person to talk to, as I say, is Michael Sastroff. He is the guy to talk to there. But my logic says that that if you have an existing market and you stop it, what fills the vacuum?
Underground market.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that's it's quite an interesting, I mean, it's a slight aside, but it's quite an interesting book in some respects, because although well, first of all, it's very focused on that, but also unlike many people, he actually accepts what would happen if we had a sudden ban, which is that you'd have about 12,000 lions that would immediately become a financial liability and would be effectively euthanized on the spot, and that would be what would have to happen. So it's in that respect quite an interesting take, which is good to see.
Yeah,
well, good in inverted commas.
Yeah, Bax and I have often had this discussion about what would happen to CBL if the government were to shut the whole thing down, and that means neutralizing all the lions. And then you look at it and you think of it, do these CBL have captive bred lions, do they have a conservational value? And this is where Bugs and I have often had talks about the whole thing. Would it be a loss to lose X amount of lions? I think it would be a loss, even if they are captively bred. But at the same time, do they have a conservational value? Do they contribute towards conservation?
Not directly, but on another basis. I think the thing is, if the people are very serious about wanting to stop this, then they need to accept that they need to cull 15 or 12,000 or 10,000 lions, and they must do that. You can't be sending these lions to sanctuaries. There's just not enough sanctuaries, and all those sanctuaries are just exactly the same. They're just another name for the same thing.
Yeah. I also think that what should have happened, Adam, and I think you would agree with me, is this whole captive bred lion should have been put under agriculture. If it was put under agriculture, we wouldn't be sitting in the mess that we're sitting in right now.
Actually, that's something that somebody said to me, and in actual fact, it was Michael Norton Griffith said this to me, and I thought it was quite interesting. He says, why don't you cross out the word lion and put in the word impala? Or cross out the word lion and put in the word goat.
It would never have the impact.
What difference does it make, you know?
That is
so I just thought, if you start doing that, then you're able to be more pragmatic, I think.
So, I mean, just to add on to this question about, as you said, cross out the word lion and put impala or an antelope, for example. Is it always the big five which matter for the conservation, or is it other?
You not exactly, because people don't really care about I'm not being funny, but animal rights don't care about buffalo. What you hear about is giraffe and lion, sometimes leopard, not so much. Leopard. And elephants.
They're getting excited about pangolins. I think people have got it all wrong. It's got absolutely nothing to do with single species, big fives, little numbers, or whatever.
Emotional.
It's about habitat, biodiversity. The more habitat and biodiversity we can have, an example I gave you earlier, with this little piece of land that we have here, is just abound with little wildlife, scarce animals that you don't see anywhere else. And they thrive here under those circumstances.
But when it comes to animals such as lion, giraffe, elephant, it's more emotional and more heartstrings that are tugged, because okay, this may sound strange, but to blame it all on Walt Disney, giving animals human qualities, cute little fuzzy thing, Timon playing with Pumbaa, the warthog, and the meerkat. It doesn't happen in real life. The lion befriending the warthog, it doesn't happen in real life. But when people look at lions, they tend to look at the cute little fuzzy wuzzy thing. When in actual fact, people should be thinking with their heads and not with their hearts, and thinking about, it's not hunting that's killing off animals, it's habitat. We don't have enough habitat. So if we invested in more habitat and more areas, we would be winning.
Yes.
So all those single species things is good currency for non-profit organizations.
Animal rights.
Unfortunately, selling habitat is not so emotional, and people don't get so excited about it. Although there are a couple of NGOs that do that.
Yeah, especially when it comes to, as Rajeev and I have often spoken about, in your African countries, like Zimbabwe, for example, they've got campfire, where it benefits communities. Zambia benefits communities. How it benefits communities is they get during the hunting season, they get jobs in the hunting camp, they get the meat, but they also get financial incentives through all of this. I mean, you take lion hunting, buffalo hunting, and elephant hunting, and leopard. Bring in your most amount of money in your African countries. And the thing is, what people don't understand is it contributes towards schooling in these rural areas. The one concession in Zambia, Royal Kafue, for example, there's so many orphans there, and it's so poor that one of the owners there, Andrew Baldry, has actually taken it upon himself for orphans to come into his concession, and he financially, what's the correct word? Supports them. But the only way he can do this is through hunting. Because unfortunately, when it comes to animal rights and all the rest of it, they don't, you know, looking at a human, they don't really have an emotional attachment. They seem to put animals above humans. And what they don't realize is without communities and without community involvement and without community incentives, that they're not going to look after the wildlife. That wildlife is going to either be poached or that land's going to be turned into agriculture. And what will happen? It will happen like what happened to South Africa so many years ago, is extermination of wildlife. You know, your wildlife numbers will dwindle, will most probably dwindle. So if you can enrich communities and those communities have an incentive to actually look after that wildlife, your wildlife populations are going to grow, and hence communities are going to become more acceptable to wildlife living around them.
I mean, that's something that I wanted to address. I've been invited to talk to you guys. I'm not sure when, but I'm gonna. That's something I wanted to address when I was going to present to you.
Okay, that's great. Actually, thank you.
Yeah, the problem here is when we have man-eaters, people, the human rights, the animal rights people say that, you know, why kill the animal?
Yes.
Why not put it in a zoo? Or I've also heard arguments.
Yes.
I've also heard arguments which say that, you know, the government is declaring an animal a man-eater for someone to shoot, which is ridiculous and stupid, but that's what these guys say.
Yes, yes. Now, I saw on that, I suppose we're talking about the same thing on that one page.
Yes.
I won't mention the name. With that leopard that killed the lady, the child, and the woman, I think it was.
Right.
It just goes to show you how unattached they are to humans.
Exactly.
A child was killed by a leopard. And I mean, it's a horrific death. But all they could do was concentrate on the animal's welfare. Let's put it in a zoo. But wait a minute. If you think about it, putting an animal in it that's known to be in the wild, you're taking it from the wild and you're putting it into captivity, into a small cage. What type of life is that for the leopard? Is that not cruel? It's a known man-eater. It's going to kill again, destroy it. It's the only humane thing to do. Human life is more than an animal's life, and that's the way it's supposed to be.
Unfortunately, a lot of the people who are dictating wildlife policy are activists who don't really know what they're talking about. They're very quick to shout and go crazy on social media, but unfortunately, you need grassroots experience to know what's going on.
Yes, there was one leopard that very recently grabbed a 1.5-year-old baby from the arms of its mother. This happened, I think, on the 12th or the 13th of this month.
Oh.
No, it's the only thing I can say is, well, to me, logic takes precedence. And
yes.
What you do is you take that animal out. If it's a man-eater, if it's killed once, it's going to do it again. The same with lions. We saw it in Mozambique. Once a man-eater, always a man-eater. And what used to happen is the females the lionesses used to kill people from the villages and that, because they used to come through from Kruger Park side where the fences and that were down. And the lioness, the one had cubs. And what happens is they eat off the humans, and they say automatically that there becomes man-eaters as well. So you know, it's carrying on from mother to siblings and so forth.
Daughters,
and so
yeah, children, yeah.
The main thing is, I don't know how it works with leopards really, but once a man-eater, it's never going to go back.
No, the kindest thing you could ever do is to put a bullet through it.
Yes, absolutely. And it's the quickest thing. It's the quickest thing.
Yes,
you move it, it's so traumatic. You're darting it, you're moving it to another place. And sometimes what happens is they don't move it further enough, so it will come back.
People tend to forget that animals are mortal, that they live and they die, and they forget that they can breed again. You know, I mean, so that it doesn't. they place far too much importance on the animal life. Nature will provide, and another one will come up. So,
in fact, we had a case where a tiger, which was a man-eater, was darted and released in another area where she killed another 3 or 4 people. Now, who's got to take the blame? The animal rights guys were the people who got the animal released in the first place.
They should be held accountable.
Decision makers.
Exactly, they should be held accountable, and yes.
Yeah.
But actually, yeah, quite a interesting debatable topic in a way, I would say. But yeah, Mr. Rajiv, I agree with you. Yeah, people have to be held accountable. But I mean, there was one statement where human life is more important than animal. I would say both are equally important for us. That is that the way you're doing the ranching. I think that is absolutely amazing. Where you're protecting the species, looking at the numbers go up. But I would say every life is important. Yes, with a few rules laid down, as you said, as you were mentioning it. Correct. But yeah, just proceeding with the final questions. I have 2 more from our listeners here. Pamela, one by Mr. C.S. Devdas. How one can justify hunting / gaming vis-a-vis conservation / protecting our biodiversity across the board? So how can you justify hunting? I mean, how can you justify the hunting or gaming vis-a-vis conservation? So how does hunting, or how can you relate these 2 topics?
Well, I would look at myself as someone who's passionate about conservation. Okay, if you're passionate about conservation, then you understand the importance of biodiversity and habitat. If you understand the importance of biodiversity and habitat, then you will know what economy that needs money to support. If you're going to do away with that, I mean, I can say, you know, you cannot do away with hunting, because then you'll do away with that biodiversity and habitat. And it's not an insignificant amount of habitat. It is in South Africa, it's 2/3 or 3 times more habitat than the state parks.
Yeah.
In Tanzania, it's way more than half. In Zimbabwe, it's way more than half. So so you're going to throw away millions and millions of hectares of wildlife estate the size of Kruger Park, multiples the size of Kruger Park. Because you fundamentally don't like hunting.
Yeah.
So I think that you need to, that's where you need to be a bit more pragmatic.
Yep.
And you need to understand that the habitat comes first.
Yeah, I would like to add, we can take Africa as a prime example, right? Your concessions. And even South Africa, okay. Some areas in Africa, you cannot get photographic safaris. It's just out the way, too far out the way, or it's just not suitable. So what happens is they have hunting concessions. If you take away that hunting concession, the government turns around, let's say Zimbabwe, and says, fine, no more hunting, all right? Those concessions close. What happens is those animals will eventually be poached. That land turns into cattle land, no more wildlife. Hunting plays a significant role in conservation by protecting habitat and protecting wildlife species. It's a known fact. And as I say, if you take hunting away, what is going to happen? All these farms in South Africa, privately owned farms that do hunting, will close. Your 12 billion plus, so you're looking at about a $16 billion industry. Will close. All the animals will be destroyed because they no longer have a value, so nobody is going to farm with them. So that means you're without X amount of wildlife. So that's why hunting does play a huge role in conservation.
The worst thing about it is once you take hunting away and you lose all that land, you don't get it back. It's gone forever.
It's gone forever.
So you really need, the guys who are pushing for hunting bans need to be very, very careful, because the consequences of their actions are absolutely massive. And they don't take responsibility for that, for those consequences. So yeah, it needs to be thought through carefully.
Oh, okay. Yeah. think that answers your question, Sudhir Das. And I think there's one, again, an anonymous question on Facebook. Yeah, do the ranches follow IUCN guidelines on conservation breeding, and how?
Yes, they do follow guidelines.
Yeah.
There are guidelines set through Department of Environmental Affairs. And in fact, if you actually go onto their web page, you will see that there are guidelines listed. So as I said, each province has a different set of guidelines and rules. And what normally happens, like on my game farm, I'll take for instance, is every 2 years you have a CAE permit, which is a capture, a certificate of adequate enclosure. So that is from 1,000 hectares and up, you get that. A permit for your fence. Anything under, you have to apply every year for them to come out and inspect your fence. Now, in South Africa, your fencing has to be between 1.8 meters and 2.4 meters, bonox and also jackal netting with electrification. So stipulations are set. So what happens is once a year or every second year, Environmental Affairs come and they inspect your fence. If everything is set and they're happy with it, they renew your permit. Secondly, every year you're supposed to submit your number of game species that you have on your farm. Environmental Affairs will come back to you and say, look, you're overstocked by X amount. You need to cull. And they'll tell them to cull. So it's very regulated.
There are regulations in place. In short, the question is there are regulations.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, just going down to the final, I think we are done with all the questions. That was a long session, and yeah, that's it. I think we are done with all the questions here. Thank you so much, Pamela and Bugs. I think I'll call you Bugs. It's okay, I hope.
Yeah, of course.
Because that's what I can see. That's what I've been hearing about your name. So, yeah. So thank you so much for your session. It was quite informative. We now know what actually works in South Africa, of course,
yes.
And also it is the way of life. I think it definitely imparts a different thinking in how to conserve these species in a broader perspective. I mean, just saving the animal doesn't work, but sometimes even, picking some extreme measures or the way the conservation activity should be done are
yes.
being expressed. Especially this is, of course, especially for South Africa, but yeah, how it will work in other countries or especially India, if you're speaking about, that has to be, again, into probably altogether a different topic for us to discuss. But it was really interesting, and thank you so much for your time and presentation. And I would like to thank Mr. Rajiv for introducing you to us. Thanks, Mr. Rajiv.
You're welcome,
for introducing.
Mr. Shrikant.
Yeah, thank you.
And I should thank Dr.
Thanks, Rajiv.
Welcome, Murthy. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Bugs and Pam. Great having you here.
The question and answer session was awesome. Some very good questions, and the answers were just as thought-provoking.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful,
Yeah,
wonderful.
it's a broad industry,
Yes.
Sometimes it cannot always be touched in one session.
That's
yes,
true.
it is.
And it's also something which is new to us. I mean, it's all what we read in the papers, and most of it is one-sided. I mean, it's the opinion of the author or the writer, depending on what frame of mind he or she was when they wrote that particular thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's why I said to Rajiv as well is you have to look at all the different aspects of our failures. We have failed, and we have succeeded.
Very true.
So don't do the mistakes that we made, so you can learn from it. But all in all, our game ranching industry that covers all those three subsectors is thriving. Our animal species are growing. We have over 50 different species in South Africa. So it's very diverse. So yeah, I'm glad you all enjoyed the talk.
Yes, and Pam, I should tell, I mean, your one slide where you had all the products.
Yes, wildlife products.
Yeah, the wildlife products. You, I think, didn't mention that the kudu horn was topped with the egg of an ostrich, the lampshade.
Yes, as a lampshade, yes. there's a lot of, that's what I love about it. You know, you can take a wildlife product and it's so unique. You can make it into whatever you want. I mean, a friend of ours makes pens out of porcupine quills. You know, so it's very diverse.
Yeah, the floating, sorry, the floating bones, the collarbones of the tigers were at one time made as brooches for women here in India.
Okay.
And the claws as buttons.
The two very good examples of sustainable use worldwide
Exactly.
is the use of ostriches and crocodiles. There were two animals that used to be poached quite heavily. And now there's no need to poach them at all because there's just so many of them. And they're being produced
for their wildlife products.
For their products.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I mean, probably I'll email this question to you, or I'll probably message this. But one question I had going in my mind: how are the local tribals being benefited from ranching? Are they? Is the way of life? Probably it's going too long, but we can take it on a different note. But because are they benefiting, or is the way of life changing because of the income or the revenue generated through ranching, or is it is it the same?
No, you see, okay, there's a lot of community projects that go out towards communities. I mean, you just take Kruger Park itself. There's a lot of schooling projects. So they benefit from schools. Schools are being built, books are being issued, teachers are being sponsored. And then you look at game meat production, whereas like Nedbank, so they take privately owned game farms and they bring in people from the communities and they start their game meat production.
So a lot of communal landowners have opted to go for wildlife.
Yeah.
And then they do a little bit of consulting with various people, and they obviously got a lot of funds go into it, and their land can be utilized either for tourism or for hunting. More often than not, it's for tourism though.
Yeah, but as I've always stressed, communities. Communities are the way forward for wildlife. Without communities, wildlife will suffer. So It doesn't matter if you're privately owned like South Africa, where most of the game farms are privately owned, they're behind a fence. A lot gets done for communities. You take, for instance, one of the associations, FASA, that's your Professional Hunters Association of South Africa, actually go to orphanages and low income areas, and through hunting donations, and that they sponsor these children or these homes. So as I say, it's very much community based. It cannot be otherwise.
And I mean, I think you've also got to remember that if you need to do social responsibility, and I think everybody does have that inside in them, but you can't do social responsibility if you're dirt poor. So if your ranch is not making money, if you're struggling to make ends meet, your tendency to be generous is a little less. You see. So, but it also is a bit of a trade-off as well. Is that as a landowner, that you need to have good relations with your neighbors. Otherwise, your land will come under threat. So you also know that trade-off is always there, and you build a relationship with the people around you.
Yes, absolutely true. And very happy to hear about the efforts being taken over there. And sorry, listeners, I mean, I had to extend it because that question was, that question was there at the back of my head, and I thought, let me put it out now. So thank you.
The more questions asked, the more people start to understand what actually conservation is in the wildlife industry.
And the less I need to talk to you about next time when I do my talk.
Don't worry, Bugs. I have a totally different set of questions ready for you then. Yes.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yes. So thanks everyone. Thanks everyone for joining. Thank you, Pamela and Bugs, and thank you, Mr. Rajiv, for introducing them to us. Thanks all the listeners. Please do join us tomorrow. We have another interesting talk as well. tomorrow, that would be on Amur Falcons. I think
and the
everyone loves an Amur
satellite
Falcon.
tracking of the Amur Falcon.
Yes, yes, sir. So the name of the talk would be Flight for Freedom, Tracking the Long Distance Migration of Amur Falcons.
Yeah,
So,
Bugs and Pam, the bird starts off from Mongolia, comes into India, and then goes way right down to South Africa where you are.
I've seen them. They nest in the Drakensberg. I've seen them. They nest in the masses. Yeah.
So,
well, not nest, but they accumulate. I don't know. They don't nest, but they all accumulate.
Yeah, they do.
That is correct. So this is going to be an interesting talk, listeners. So everyone, please do join us tomorrow as well, and please log on to our Facebook page, or even we have a YouTube channel where you can find all our past videos, all the talks which we hosted so far. So
I'll post it on our WhatsApp page also.
Yes.
I'll do that so that all of us.
Yeah. Thanks,
Thank
Rajiv.
you. Thank you
You're
so
welcome.
much.
Yeah,
Thanks, Rajiv.
pleasure.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you. Umesh,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks to all the listeners. Thank you. Bye bye.